Heyo, what's up guys? I'm back on the other side of the world and back with another Ever Crisis video. Today I'm going to be talking about the ultimate weapons. Of course, there's been a lot of cool stuff happening with the anniversary, ultimate weapons being one of them. And sadly I've not been able to cover it all because of, having to fly and being jet lagged and blah blah blah. So today I'm going to be looking at each of the ultimate weapons that are currently available to us and just giving my opinions on each of them. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, like, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff, and let's get into it. If you are unaware or have forgotten where to find the ultimate weapons in the game, besides for the one that's available in the current gacha draw, you can go to the Metal Exchange, under Shop Exchange, Metal Exchange, and you can find the sort of standard ones available to us. So let's start off with the one from the gacha draw, the Genji Blade for Sephiroth. Now, obviously, this is pretty much the best ultimate weapon available to us right now. That is primarily because it's actually from a gacha draw and not from the exchange. So it's the best because it's from a gacha draw and because it has interruption mastery, which is a cool new R ability that it's quite cool that when you interrupt enemies' abilities by casting your own limit breaks and or ultimate abilities, whatever, then you will actually get more ability potency. That's really cool. Also better than the standard weapons because it has higher stats than the ones in the exchange. And it has two uses with 2000% damage and the highest increase currently for physical and magic attack, so a very high potency buff to those stats. Next up is the 4-point Shuriken. For me, this is actually one of my least favorites because I don't really like the fact that it buffs both physical attack and magical attack. In most cases, you're only going to need either one or the other on a single character, unless you're really going for some fancy hybrid build, which could be pretty cool. But in general, I'm not a fan of buffing both of those. Also, I don't really like it because it's sort of a selfish ultimate weapon. It only buffs Yuffie herself, so you can't actually target another ally with this. Obviously, it's still good if you use Yuffie as a main DPS. It's going to help your DPS out quite a bit. But personally, I use her as a debuffer more than anything. So next up is the Broadsword Axis, Matt's ultimate weapon, and I'm actually a pretty big fan of this one. It's, extra heals in clutch moments can always come in handy, especially in longer and harder fights. That's always going to be useful. And then, of course, it also removes physical defense down and magic defense down. The defensive debuffs, you can just remove those with this weapon. That can come in handy quite a lot. Obviously going to be better with a higher HP team because it restores 25% of max HP, and average would be about 2250 heal because if you're looking at about 9k HP characters. This can also be useful because it can actually replace a healing weapon in Crisis dungeons and dungeon rankings if we actually have those again, because you can use the items, a combination of this weapon and the items to cover your healing, so you don't actually have to bring like a fairy tale or something. Next up is the Buster Sword, and I like this one quite a lot because it is both damage and a debuff. So the double debuff is pretty good against dual damage type enemies like Bahamut. It does both physical and magical damage, and this debuffs both physical and magical, so it'll be super useful there. And I assume boss fights in the future are going to have more like dual type bosses where they do both magic attacks and physical attacks. This can also kind of replace weapons like Slick Beetle, Leather Gloves, Tiger Fangs in shorter fights, obviously because you only have one use of it, but you can sort of use it as a replacement for those. It's pretty good in fights where the bosses only buff their attack or magic attack once or twice. Next up is the ultimate Gatling Gun from Barrett. To be honest, I'm not too big of a fan of this one myself. It's obviously good value if you don't have an AoE physical defense buffing weapon, and it can be a nice replacement, direct replacement for his assault gun in shorter fights, obviously because it only has one use. But the assault gun itself has ice resistance and boost heal R abilities, which are not really that great in my opinion for Barret. He's not really much of a healer, and Ice resistance is super niche and specific. So you could actually get a completely different weapon if you were bringing an assault gun normally, and then just add this to cover that, the physical defense that the assault gun would normally give you. For me, honestly, like weapons like Centipede that give you AoE healing and AoE physical defense are just too good, and that's why I don't really value this one that much. For the guard stick, much like Matt's ultimate broadsword axis, ultimate guard stick for me, I'm a pretty big fan of this one because again, it's the clutch healing in a clutch situation for longer and harder fights. Extra healing can always be appreciated. And on top of that, it's got the offensive cleanse, which I think is pretty much a new thing. For example, Matt's cleanse of defensive debuffs, that can be done with Aerith's Breath of the Earth limit break, but the cleanse of offensive debuffs, so physical attack down, magic attack down, as far as I know, that's a new thing, correct me if I'm wrong, but that can be super useful as well against enemies that like to obviously debuff those stats. Same thing as with Matt's weapon, this can kind of replace a healing weapon in crisis dungeons or ranking dungeons, if they still ever have those again. You can use a combination of this weapon and the items to heal. Next up is the leather collar for red, ultimate leather collar. Again, this is something I'm not a big fan of myself. Obviously, it's mainly about the regen, and the regen shouldn't be underestimated. Regen is actually pretty good. And of course, the heal is kind of like half of Aerith's. So it's almost like you're breaking up Aerith's heal into half of that heal and half of that as regen, maybe a bit more than half. But overall, I'm not a big fan of it. I prefer the straight up 50% heal that Aerith's gives, and of course, removes debuffs as well. Then we have the ultimate leather gloves from Tifa. And this, in my opinion, is honestly a pretty solid ultimate weapon to go for. It's not really a high priority for me specifically, because I have Kimura Wand to buff my physical attack AoE. It is definitely good for hybrid teams and for sort of newer players or full elemental teams if you don't have tons of different elemental weapons, for example, to cover it. So to give you an example, my win team is something like Sephiroth, Aerith, and either Yuffie or Zac for more wind damage, or just a healer. And that is a very physical-based team. Sephiroth with Dark Heavens, Aerith with the Floral Wand. And so the Ultimate Leather Gloves won't be that useful in that team. But for example, I don't have that many water weapons. So my water weapon team is basically Cloud with Maritime Sword and Tifa with the Bunny Gloves. So one is physical, one is magical. This weapon will have a lot more value in teams like that because it buffs both physical and magical. So it definitely has its uses, and I think it is a pretty good weapon. Next up is the Nameless. This is also a pretty good weapon for a nice burst of DPS, especially of course if the enemy is debuffed. You want the enemy to be debuffed so that you can do that ×2 damage. That'll give you a once of 3000% non-elemental damage. That's gives you a nice little burst of DPS to help out your damage in a boss fight. Obviously, it is, if you don't have Genji Sword or not planning to go for the Genji Blade, then it's pretty worth it if you just want that DPS boost. But if you already have or are planning on getting the Genji Blade, then Nameless is pretty much just worse than it, so don't go for Nameless. Glenn's Ultimate Personal Style comes next, and kind of similar to the Ultimate Gatling Gun from Barret, I'm not a huge fan of this one. It's obviously good value if you don't have AoE magic defense buff, and of course if you like using Glenn. It can also kind of replace weapons in shorter fights like the Bandage Sword or Core Defender that do the same thing. They give AoE magic defense buffs. If it's a shorter fight, or you only kind of really need to block one big magical attack, something like that, then this can be a pretty good replacement for those weapons. For me, once again, the Kimura Wand is just too good for me. It kind of covers that for me, but obviously it does have that 70% HP restriction, so you got to consider that. I'm happy with the Kimura Wand and Core Defender myself, so I'm not planning on going for Glenn's. Then we have the Ultimate Quicksilver, which is Vincent's ultimate weapon for the exchange. And this is really cool actually, but also really niche. It only works on Vincent himself. It does deal 1000% damage, so you do get a bit of DPS burst, and it charges the limit gauge of Vincent's only by 40%, which is pretty nice, especially considering Vincent's whole gimmick with his big, long charging limit breaks. I'm not actually sure if this thing charges summons as well. I haven't had time to test that, so if you know, please do let me know in the comments below. I'd appreciate that. Overall, I think this could be pretty good if you make a limit break Vincent build. Next up is the ultimate type 99 Longsword, which is kind of like the ultimate Buster Sword with different buffs / debuffs. I like this one quite a lot because again, it's damage plus a debuff. It is also it's great for hybrid teams, like what I mentioned with my water team, for example. I only really have a good maritime sword and bunny gloves. That's both physical and magical for a water-based team, and this lowers physical defense and magic defense, so it'll fit in pretty well with that kind of a team. And I could bring Zac for extra wind damage and the ultimate type 99 Longsword to lower their defenses. It's also strong with Ceremonial Sword because, of course, Ceremonial Sword raises your physical attack by high potency, and this lowers physical defense. That's a pretty good combo as it is, and for that, all you need is Zac with Ceremonial Sword and with this. Moving on to the V39. I'm not a big fan of this one. Kind of like Yuffie's weapon, I don't really like the physical and magic attack buffs. It's only really good if you're going for some funky hybrid build. Otherwise, you probably only need either physical attack or magic attack. So just the fact that it buffs both of those and you only really need one for most cases makes it not that great for me. But of course, it does give Lucia more supportive options. So you could take something like this and her cheering shots limit break and turn her into quite a decent offensive support, offensive buffing. Finally, we have the ultimate yellow Megaphone. This is also really cool, but also pretty niche. It's not as niche as Vincent's, because you can actually target an ally, whereas Vincent's only does it to himself. But it does do 10% less limit gauge charge than Vincent's. That makes sense because you can do it to whoever you want. I think this is pretty cool because you can create like an ultimate Vincent limit break team with this and the ultimate Quicksilver. Catchy Vincent in your team, and you can charge his big long charging limit breaks a lot easier, and you can equip Vincent with sub-weapons for limit break potency to really make most of it, make a really cool different kind of build. I also think this could be really good in the future when we get stronger and most likely longer charging limit breaks like the Omni Slash. And that is pretty much it. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite ultimate weapons are and which ones you're going to be going for. Personally, I'm a big fan of the healing weapons as well as Cloud's and Zac's. I also do like the limit break weapons, Vincent's and Ketchi's, but we'll have to see. So yeah, let me know what you prefer the most. Let me know if you think I've undervalued or overvalued a certain weapon. Just drop a comment, and best of luck on all of your pulls during the anniversary and all of that. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.